Okay, folks, I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to Improving Teaching and Learning in Higher Education Using Lesson Study. Good morning or good afternoon. I think that probably covers it. We are really excited to be talking with you about lesson study, a powerful professional development experience that was started a century ago in Japan is so simple and elegant and focused on making student thinking and learning visible that it's highly relevant and aligns with some current research around visible learning, and is a really powerful tool for K through 16 educators. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge our partners and colleagues in this work. Nikki Edgecombe and Sue Bickerstaff are here from the Community College Research Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. They're our lead research organization. Natalie Denny and Michelle Marden, faculty from Portland Community College here in Oregon, are joining us. They are from one of the three community colleges in Oregon that participated in the project we'll be talking to you about. We also have Juliet Langman here from the University of Texas at San Antonio. She and her team are also studying lesson study with funding from the National Science Foundation, and they have some unique perspectives to share about lesson study. And finally, we have Elizabeth Cox-Brand with us. She is the executive director of the Oregon Student Success Center at the Oregon Community College Association, and she will provide some final comments on the importance of instruction-focused professional development here in Oregon. And although they aren't here today, I don't think we could possibly have any more presenters. I do want to thank faculty at Clackamas Community College and Lane Community College for their active participation and collaboration in this project. In our session this morning or this afternoon, we will provide some background on our project, briefly review what lesson study is, and hear from colleagues at San Antonio. We will review our qualitative research findings with you, and afterwards, our faculty members with us will share their experiences with lesson study. As you can see, there isn't a chat feature in this version of Zoom. However, we encourage you to open the Q&A feature and use it to submit questions as you think of them during the presentation. You can submit a question at any time, and during the last 10 minutes or so, we'll address as many of these as we can. So I want to note that this research and this project is funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute for Education Sciences. Before we get started, we'd like to hear from you. Whether you're a post-secondary or a K-12 educator or administrator, most likely you've participated in some professional development in your life. We're going to ask you to think about your best professional development experience that you've ever had, and also a little bit about improving or changing instruction at the post-secondary level. We're going to use Jamboard. So the link is here. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and type that link into your browser if you have access to that. It should also be in the Q&A, I hope, so that you can take a look at it. So I'll give you a moment to type that into your browser, and then I'm going to switch and we will have our interactive instructions. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Oh, good. I see a number of you here. So you can see here, the first question for you is, what were the characteristics of a powerful professional development experience in which you participated? And what you need to do is go over here, pick up a sticky note. You can choose any color you like and write down your response. I hope you could see this. Save it and cancel, and you'll be able to see it here. Or you should be able to see it here. See, what happens is you may lay on top of each other. I will try to move you, or if you're willing, you can resize it. If this screen gets filled up, please go to the next one, which is the same question. And then we have a second question for you here. What are some challenges to improving teaching at the post-secondary level? So 2 questions, 4 screens in case you all fill them up at once. And we'll give you just a couple minutes to, just a minute or so to write some responses. And forgive me if I move you around. I'm just trying to make it visible for everybody.
Jacqueline, could you go back to the slide with the link so that people can type that in again?
Sure can. http://bit.ly/30s30 capital E lowercase c. Thank you, Natalie. Don't forget to put some comments for the second question if you have insights on what some challenges might be to improving or changing instruction, teaching at the post-secondary level. Okay, if I was doing a word cloud, I would see a lot of the word collaborative here for characteristics of powerful professional development, practical, goal-oriented, meaningful conversations about teaching, activities and exercises that are job embedded that we can use in our classrooms. Active learning components. These are all what the research say is important for effective professional development. You guys are a highly skilled audience. And I think also capture a lot of what we hope for in the ideal experience, which is that it's meaningful and really doesn't give us anything extra. It gives us exactly what we need to be able to pinpoint what it is we're doing in our work. And I think that's fabulous. A lot of these, I would say, a lot of these characteristics, you are going to find that lesson study, when done well, will promulgate, will support, will bring about. Some of the challenges to improving teaching, funding, no, lesson study can't fix all of these, but things like initiative fatigue, the difficulty in being able to separate content from practice, system level challenges, restrictions from the college and or state. Our project was designed to look at how lesson study could be adapted to be able to be successful at helping make some needed changes at the post-secondary level in instruction. And these were defined by the participants, as you'll find out. So thank you so much. Oh, funding. Yeah, that's an important one. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to our slides. You did a wonderful job. And we will be referring to many of those factors as we move on. I'm going to turn this over now to Nikki.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And it's really wonderful to see this large group joining us today. We're excited about this project and have been for a long time. We were very excited to get it funded. And I'm just going to talk a bit about, provide perspective on how this project came about and what it aspired to do. So why did we want to study professional development in community colleges? Well, at CCRC, we saw the demand for quite tailored, quite practical, relevant professional development, a lot of the characteristics you guys just described on the Jamboard, in our research on developmental education reform. But for a variety of reasons, many of which you all already highlighted, there were barriers to both uptake and the impact of the professional development that we saw available in the field. So, for example, we certainly saw few systematic opportunities for faculty to improve their teaching, in particular in their discipline, right? So it might have been a more generic type professional development offering that was available, but maybe it wasn't specifically about teaching this kind of mathematics or this kind of science. We also saw, and this is an important feature in question in the community college space, scarce resources and support for part-time faculty. While oftentimes professional learning opportunities were available to this group of faculties, oftentimes around 2/3 of instructional staff at many community colleges, it was often difficult for them to take advantage of the opportunities that were available to them. So we were interested in studying a model of PD that was more intensive, more intentional, and in particular focused on disciplinary learning. We certainly didn't anticipate in 2017 when this project got started that today we'd be in the midst of a global pandemic that's really shined a light on instructional delivery and is asking faculty in many cases to dramatically change their teaching. But this situation points to the importance of very intentionally structuring learning opportunities for faculty. And it's also requiring us to really revisit many facets of classroom instruction, curriculum, pedagogy, our learning environments, if we want to address disparities in outcomes by race and other student characteristics in particular. So we're at a point today where we have a lot of promising reforms that are gaining traction, things like developmental education reforms, like our co-requisite models, guided pathways, lots of interesting reforms to advising as well. But if we don't improve teaching and learning, coincidentally, these reforms likely won't reach their full potential. So in partnership with Education Northwest and 3 community colleges in Oregon, we launched the Adapting the Lesson Study project. So Jacqueline, I think we can move to the next slide. So Jacqueline's going to provide momentarily a lot more detail about the lesson study model, but just quickly, this model of faculty development has been shown to improve teaching practice and student learning in studies of elementary and middle school math. So as we were thinking about what this project could be, we set out to create a project, the goal of which was to understand whether this evidence-based approach could be adapted for use in post-secondary context. As our friends at UT San Antonio, others at UW La Crosse and other places, there had been some movement in this space within higher education, but not necessarily a systematic movement and not necessarily a closer look at whether the model could work in the community college space. So guided by the 2 research questions, the first 2 bullets there on the slide, we implemented in close collaboration with faculty a project that focuses on developmental mathematics, and specifically on what at the time was a relatively new course in the state of Oregon called Math 98. Now, Math 98 is a developmental level quantitative reasoning course that prepares students for math, for liberal arts, and statistics. We knew lesson study was a powerful vehicle to improve teaching and learning, but its adaptation to the community college context needed to be a collaborative development effort. So this project is a partnership between Education Northwest, the Community College Research Center, and the 3 community colleges that Jacqueline just introduced at the start of the presentation. And we're delighted to have our friends from Portland Community College here with us to talk about their experience with the project. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jacqueline, who's going to walk us through the model.
Okay, thank you so much. Lesson study is provides educators with a structured, robust professional development opportunity that, as I mentioned earlier, focuses specifically on student learning and how instructional decisions can improve student reasoning and understanding. And in this case, in this project, in mathematics, but it can be used across content areas. Um, in this model, there is a set of sequenced activities, as well as we found some broader implementation practices that, if attended to, can help teams to make lesson study as effective and impactful as possible. Lesson study teams, and here we're talking about teams working together, they conduct or undertake iterative inquiry cycles to collaboratively design, teach, and reflect upon the effects of a lesson that they select, which in this context we defined as a specific period of instruction lasting approximately 1 to 2 hours. Each lesson study team at each of the 3 colleges we worked with is guided by a research theme, which is selected by the team and sets the direction for perhaps 1 or more years of lesson study work. The research theme typically relates to a core purpose of the course. It defines a problem of practice that participants care deeply about. Usually, these research themes are effective, such as how do we build students' confidence in their mathematical reasoning and help them be more willing to persevere, perhaps, in problem solving. To address this theme, the participants consult research, they better understand the relevant theory and practice around that goal, which opens new doors for their professional growth. Typically, teams completed 1 to 2 lesson study cycles each year in our study. Um, with both of those cycles addressing the same or a slightly refined research theme. In our first interim report published in 2019, when we were a little over halfway through the project, we reviewed the rationale for considering lesson study in community colleges and shared some initial observations from the first year of our work. By the way, we'll be sharing all of these resources with you after the webinar if you signed up. Many of you have probably seen or heard of a lesson study cycle. The activities that comprise lesson study can be grouped into 4 stages of a cycle, which are approached again collaboratively by the team. The first one is study and plan. This sets the stage for all of the professional learning that takes place during the cycle. The team identifies goals for students, looks at curriculum, looks at research, particularly around the research theme that it identified. The team also identifies a substantive or content topic that they want to use. In this case, it was often a concept in mathematics that the team felt students struggled to understand or that they struggled to teach. Um, Once that's selected, they've looked at their curriculum and figured out which lesson they want to focus on. They did a detailed lesson plan, which I think you'll hear about later, that included tasks, anticipated student responses, what the instructor would do throughout the lesson, and questions and opportunities to collect evaluation data. They also developed collaboration norms and understood the rationale behind lesson study. After that, in stage 2, one team member taught the lesson that was developed collaboratively by the team, while others observed and recorded what they saw, what evidence they saw of student learning, and where there were gaps. The team members came together and shared that data in a debrief session and explored whether students achieved the goals that they set out for that lesson. In the revise and reteach stage, the team uses its observation findings to revise the lesson. A team member reteaches the lesson that they the revised lesson, while other team members observe again and collect evidence of student learning. And then the team looks at whether this revised lesson was more successful at achieving the goals it described. Finally, in the reflect and report stage, the team reflects overall on the results of its cycle, ideally documents its learning in a report, and plans how it will share and disseminate the information with peers and other stakeholders. This is especially important if you want to expand the reach and scale up the learning that happened during the cycle. If there is a small department, I wanted to share, like let's say there's really not a lot of faculty teaching the same course. One of the opportunities to engage more folks in lesson study is to have them participate in the observation um, activities of lesson study. So you can invite others who aren't necessarily part of designing and revising the lesson, but they can observe and provide feedback. And this is one way that we found that you can take a small group and be able to engage them in lesson study. Um, The lesson study process can be broken down into 10 steps across the 4 stages. Although in hindsight, these steps look kind of obvious to me, we worked and reworked them with our faculty partners to make the tasks and instructions for each step as straightforward and simple as possible. It was very important to us to make this learnable by newcomers to lesson study as quickly as we could so that they would be able to ultimately sustain this practice on their own if they chose to. One of the challenges that all of our teams had was how do we schedule this? How do we teach and then reteach a lesson in course that is highly sequenced? This slide gives you a little bit of a picture of how teams generally in this project organized and scheduled their cycles so that they could teach, revise, and reteach a lesson in the same term or semester. There are other possible approaches to scheduling. It also gives you a little bit of a sense of the time commitment involved. Study and plan is a longer stage in the cycle because it really is where you're setting the groundwork and the foundation for the rest of your learning. There's several 2-hour meetings there. The teach and debrief happened in many cases in this example in October. The revise happened soon after that, but enough time for folks to reflect. And then they retaught the lesson right after the revision and had time in November to be able to reflect on the entire cycle. We also found that there were 3 what we call implementation practices that were important to realize the benefits of lesson study. These help to make lesson study more effective in the study and in the research we were conducting. The first focuses on developing and sustaining a collaborative team, creating a sense of camaraderie and being able to work together, which isn't always the case in a post-secondary setting or in any setting. To support this process, we facilitated in the beginning when we worked with the college participants, help them to understand lesson study, what its purpose was, to develop a clear purpose for the cycle they would undertake, to develop and then abide by collaboration norms, and also to focus on maintaining an inquiry focus on student learning rather than on faculty behaviors throughout the process. This was important for the team to see this as an inquiry. The second practice is to study, research, and apply evidence-based practices. Without this emphasis, lesson study participants may design and refine lessons in ways that either aren't very impactful or ambitious, or maybe even run counter to the best available evidence on student learning. So building in time to be able to look at research on instruction, folks in our study found this very valuable, something they didn't always have time to do, and it allowed them to translate empirical evidence into classroom practice in their cycles. The third practice is to generate and share professional knowledge. If the time invested in lesson study is to have long-term benefits, and if it's going to be scaled up to include more faculty, learnings needed to be made explicit and shared. So we spent time as we worked with faculty discussing how to be able to do that together. Um, I wanted to share with you that as a result of this project, we have some new materials that were developed for lesson study. These are meant to be used K through 16 across content areas. They're the result of the work in this project. They are going to be available. They are available, but we'll send you a link to everybody. They're meant to be standalone, so we're hoping that they can be extremely valuable if you want to undertake lesson study. And of course, we're available to help with that as well. The Facilitator Guide includes background information for someone who might initiate and facilitate a lesson study team. It includes supporting research, guidance, contextual information that's important to have if you're organizing with a team. It includes time recommendations, guidance, what kind of preparation is needed for each of the steps throughout the process. So it's meant to be a pretty useful tool. I hope you find it to be so. We also have a participant guide that engages everybody on the team in the process and provides what they need in terms of guidance and resources to be able to engage fully and actively in lesson study. And the team notebook is a Word document that's meant to be used as a Google Doc and possibly projected as the team is working together for recording its decisions and its process, and it can be reused for each cycle. So these are all available. We'll be sending links to all of this for you. We are happy to answer any questions you have about lesson study and to give you some guidance to get started. On the website that we'll be sending you the link, there's also interviews from faculty about each of the stages of lesson study and what they learned. So I hope that you will have a chance to take a look at that. Okay, I'm going to turn this over now, to Juliet. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want me to share my slide, or is it on the?
It's on.
Thank you so much. So I really am appreciative of the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at UTSA in engineering and physics gateway courses with high numbers of DFW rates. And specifically, I was asked to talk today a little bit about the challenges and opportunities that we found in spring of 2020 and beyond as a result of COVID-19 and the rapid shifting from face-to-face to online context. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our engineering team first, and I've laid the slide out in terms of the challenges that the team identified for themselves, and then the opportunities that they took as a result of the challenges they identified. So the engineering team had been working together for 5 semesters when spring 2020 came along, with the same set of individuals always participating and always at least one new person joining in. So the immediate challenges that they talked about were all directly related to the way in which we had thought about lesson study, which is always focused on student learning. So they articulated things like, how are we going to implement our hands-on activities that we've spent so much time designing in an online space? How are we going to maintain opportunities for collaboration, including just the logistics of creating breakout rooms, virtual breakout rooms with instructions for student groups? And how do we create online opportunities for students to ask questions during their group activities if a faculty member can't be in 20 groups at once? So those were the challenges that they identified over the course of 2 lesson study meetings in March of 2020. And the solutions that they came up with are represented on the 2 bullet points plus the image on the right-hand side for the course they actually carried out in April of 2020. So the first thing that they did was they said, well, one thing we can do is incorporate our recitation or TA sections for the online teaching and move some of the group activities there. The second is that they asked for, and collaboratively we put together sort of a boot camp on the use of Padlet that allowed for them to engage in a virtual visualization of the tasks that they would otherwise have done with actual physical cards in their hands in small groups. And so in the image, what you can see, I apologize, it's not very clear. It's an engineering problem in which they're trying to identify the relationships between particular formula that are finding, particular formula for solving a particular type of problem and the solutions that match the formula. And so what you can see is an image of a Padlet where the students were mixing and matching the materials. They're all color coded now on the final answer. Obviously they were not color coded, which would have eased the sorting task. And what they worked out was also a way of having the students engage in the use of the chat on the side. So we sort of conceptualize this as an extremely successful and very rapid pivot from a face-to-face to an online environment. And we attributed that in large measure to the fact that the lesson study group immediately framed the lesson study session as the place where challenges could be identified and met related to student learning. Now I'll move to the bottom part of the slide. The physics group, in contrast, was a lesson study group that had been operating also for 5 semesters, but every semester there were 2 new people participating. So in a sense, you might say that every semester we had a new lesson study team that started all over again, even though some materials were shared from previous teams. So inconsistencies in collaboration were immediately exacerbated in spring of 2020. We were at roughly the same spot having planned the in-person lesson, but there was no sense among the team that it could be easily or quickly implemented in the virtual environment. So they identified the same set of challenges, the challenges that they identified really had to do with the ways in which they operated as a group and the way in which they saw themselves as instructors. So what opportunities were provided and discussed were some of the same that you can see, above with the engineering group. The idea of including new online tools such as Panopto, which could allow for virtual visualization, but the determination was made not to do that. They also talked a lot about we need to create an interactive environment in an asynchronous online space, but because the decision had been made that the courses would be asynchronous, they weren't able to sort of talk about how they could transition. And finally, we talked about expanding the role of the research assistants in the lesson study process, which is something that started and has continued now into fall and spring of 21. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and we'll have her contact information available if folks have additional questions about the research they're in the middle of conducting. So thank you for sharing. And now we move on to Sue.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Bickerstaff from the Community College Research Center. And as has been mentioned previously, CCRC served as the research partner on this project. Over the course of 2 years, we had the privilege of working closely with the faculty teams at the 3 colleges and collecting a wealth of qualitative data on faculty's experiences with lesson study. We observed lesson study cycles that faculty participated in. We collected the lesson plans, and we conducted interviews with all faculty participants at least once, and in many cases twice, at the beginning and at the end of their lesson study experience. So in our data, we saw the ways that lesson study helped the math faculty in this project make 2 kinds of changes to their teaching practices. First, they adopted more open-ended, cognitively demanding tasks in their lessons. And second, they structured more time for interactive discussion and mathematical communication among students during class time. So today I'm going to share, they're on this slide, 3 features of lesson study that supported faculty to make these kinds of changes in their teaching. And I'll also note that CCRC did collect data on student performance and on the institutional conditions that support the implementation of lesson study. And those findings will be published later this year. So here you'll see the 3 features, and I'm going to talk just briefly about each of them. Lesson study grounds conversations about instruction and long-term goals for students. It focuses attention on students and their learning, and it provides a supportive environment to experiment with something new. So the first feature is that lesson study protocols that are in that facilitation guide and participant guide that Jacqueline showcased earlier, they ask the team to envision both short and long-term learning goals for students. The short-term goals are the learning objectives for the lesson that are the focus of that particular cycle. But as Jacqueline explained, the long-term goal is articulated in what lesson study calls a research theme. So typically a lesson study team would select a research theme that would be the focus, their focus for multiple cycles over several semesters or even over years. And on this slide, you'll see the research theme for one of the teams that participated in this project. So these long-term goals tend to be more holistic in that they are not focused on a specific skill or content area. And the lesson study facilitation materials prompt the team to consider the research theme when they're designing the lesson and when they're revising it. And this reminder to think about the big picture in this project seemed to help combat the tendency to overemphasize skill-based instruction. So all of the faculty who participate in this project felt that strengthening students' conceptual and deep understandings is critically important, but the research theme and the return to it throughout the cycle provided encouragement for teams to continue to keep this priority in mind. Next slide. So the second feature is the way that lesson study activities and practices are explicitly focused on students and on their learning. The facilitation materials throughout center the student experience, but this is most evident in the observations of the lessons. So normally, when you imagine a classroom observation in a post-secondary setting, you might imagine someone sitting in the back of a classroom taking note of what the instructor is doing. But in lesson study, the observers watch the students. And the main question that the observers are charged with answering is, how did students interact with the lesson that we co-developed? So in this project, team members sat with a small group of students and stayed with that student group throughout the class period. So they got detailed information on how particular students engaged with the entirety of the lesson. And you'll see some examples of the kinds of observation questions the teams in this project asked here on the slide. In our interviews with faculty, they consistently told us that the observation and the ability to watch students over an entire class period was one of the most powerful elements of lesson study for helping them to gain insights into their students' capabilities and the kinds of teaching approaches that would benefit their students. And the third feature is the environment that lesson study creates to support experimentation. So this is a quote from an interview with a faculty member, and you'll see references to the lesson study protocols and the way that they fostered experimentation, and they did so without fostering a sense of judgment for individual teachers and how they teach. So the protocols for planning, observing, and debriefing and revising emphasize taking an empirical approach to trying something new in the classroom. The idea here is to learn something new about students and teaching through a single lesson. So this would not be an efficient use of lesson study to try to revise each lesson in a course. That would take years if you were to do one cycle per semester. Instead, by experimenting with evidence-based practices, the goal is to learn something new about how students learn, and then that learning can be broadly applied to an instructor's teaching. And in this study, many participants reported that the instructional decisions that their team made for the lesson study cycle were different from the instructional decisions that they would have made in their own teaching. But the collaborative approach and the emphasis on experimentation encouraged faculty who may have otherwise been reluctant to try something new to do it in this context and learn from that experience. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about our research findings on mathematics instruction, Jacqueline and I have a paper on this topic, which we hope will be published later this year. And then you can stay tuned to CCRC's website for other findings from the project. And now I am pleased to turn this over to Natalie Denny and Michelle Marden from PCC, who will tell you about their experience.
Thanks, Sue. Now for a little shift. Michelle and I are going to share our personal experiences with lesson study. So I'd like for everybody to start by closing your eyes. Imagine you are in a classroom during a traditional classroom observation. Are you the instructor at the front or the evaluator sitting at the back? How did you prepare for this moment? Are you thinking about what the instructor is doing or how the students are responding? Whether you are the instructor or the evaluator, what did you hope to get from this experience? Now think about that follow-up meeting. What is the debrief like? Is it useful to you? Will it be useful to our students? Or do you just want it over with? Okay, now open your eyes. Take a deep breath. You are not in a classroom observation. Some of you might see classroom observations or the debriefing as a stressful experience, but observations in lesson study are the most powerful, eye-opening experiences I've had in many, many years of professional development. They were the aha moment for myself in this whole process. Next slide. At Portland Community College, we engaged in 5 lesson study cycles, one each term from the fall of 2018 to winter of 2020. 4 of those cycles focused on a developmental math course on quantitative literacy, our math 58 and 98 classes. Our initial team had 4 math faculty members split between full and part-time. We As a team, we were attracted to lesson study because we had already collaborated together, and we saw this as an opportunity to make our courses better. In the beginning of lesson study for myself, I just wanted to jump in and design a new lesson. I love designing lessons, but this isn't what happens in the beginning of lesson study. The structure has you setting research goals and objectives. And so I wanted to reshare. Our team's research goal was, how do we build students' confidence in their mathematical reasoning and willingness to persevere in problem solving by promoting a productive disposition, supporting a growth mindset, and embrace and learn from confusion. In selecting the lesson, we thought about the hardest topic in the course for students to learn and engage in, which is dimensional analysis, changing units of measurement. Using a backward design approach, we thought, okay, what are the topics that they need to be successful at in order to be more prepared to approach that lesson? So in our first cycle, we picked the topic of length, area, and volume for students to engage in to help them be more prepared for dimensional analysis later in the course. Okay, so now we're finally to the lesson planning stage. This is my favorite. Oh wait, we have to fill in a lot of details in a lesson plan. This isn't something that you're used to doing in higher education, but we all wanted to be faithful to this process and see where it took us. So the process had us thinking deeply about anticipated student responses and how the instructor would react to those. We had rich conversations about how students learn these concepts, or what we thought about how they learned those concepts. Each of us grew as instructors by spending time doing this with each other. From this, we were able to plan for the observation. So we kept in mind that research theme, what our goals were, what those anticipated students' responses were, and it helped us stay student focused. Which brings me to my favorite part of the lesson study, the observation and debriefing. I have observed many instructors in my day, mostly to gain tips or strategies. However, I've never sat in a classroom to focus on how students interact with the lesson. Throughout the cycle at different times, lesson study cycles, I played both the role of the teaching instructor as well as the observer. And as an instructor, we all know you walk around a classroom and you hear little snippets of what students are thinking, but you never get the opportunity to focus and understand their entire progression of thought and learning. I remember my first time being the instructor of the lesson during our lesson study cycle. And I'm not gonna lie, having 3 colleagues and other observers sit in your classroom is a little unnerving, but they weren't looking at me. They watched and made notes about the students' reactions to our lesson. In essence, we were all at the proverbial front of the room. That same spirit followed us into the debriefing meeting. When it came time to the debrief, I heard each observer report their data about my students. Much more data than I could have ever achieved on my own in my classroom. We also studied the collected samples of student work. We put posters all around our meeting room of student work. And that focused our attention on our students and the lesson that we wrote together. That's the moment that I realized how powerful that lesson study process was. And with all that careful planning, we would not have been able to collect meaningful data to share and to learn from. The final stage of a lesson study cycle is reflecting and reporting. Another first for us, we had to reflect on our struggles and successes as a team. So at first it felt really clunky to talk with each other about how we work together. But since this stage happens after, like a couple weeks after you do the reteach and debrief, we had time to process what we had been through. And we all acknowledged we were at times barely hanging on, just like this kitten is in this picture. And we also realized we didn't make our course better. We made our approach to teaching better through this professional development. So Michelle is not only a math colleague at my campus, but she's also a partner on this lesson study project. Michelle, what can you add about this first cycle?
Thanks, Natalie. I really appreciated hearing how it felt really slow to you at first. I had a different take on it, but I think that that could be a common experience, that it feels slow at first. And I think one of the parts that might feel especially slow to people is taking the time to build those collaboration norms. I really strongly believe that any group works best together if they do take the time to think about what it's going to be like to work together. What do they need to make it a safe space for each other? Especially when you have faculty groups, because it can get into some tension points because we're all really deeply care about teaching and how we teach, and we see things differently. So if there's not any care taken to address that, it can create a lot of tension. It's also helpful, I think, to share about each other's work styles. And as Natalie was mentioning, to do that reflection piece, think about what went well and maybe what could be improved in the next cycle as you work together. So when that lesson study came, I was thrilled to see this was already a part of it. I had not been a part of a professional development for faculty, at least, that had this as an expected part of the work. I think it made us a lot stronger, like Natalie said, for us to move forward.
Thanks, Michelle. At the second cycle and beyond, we, like these happy doggos here, we were able to run through future cycles with more ease. It was just easier to work together as a team, not because we were more comfortable together, but we just collectively knew what our students could do. So we were able to develop even better lessons, richer lessons, more tasks that are group worthy, that we could see our students go through that productive struggle and witness the rich variety of responses. We were also able to refine our gallery walk strategy, which we had used in our first lesson study cycle, and we continued to use for future lessons. We not only were able to make that usable in our quantitative literacy classes, but we made an off-the-shelf version that we could use in any math course. And also, I can't tell you how much I felt that I was a better instructor. I don't think I'm alone in this. As I planned for other courses, I had improved my student-centered focus. When I developed lessons for a variety of levels of courses, I just had a better sense of how students would react, how they would think, because I had spent so much time watching them think. Michelle, would you like to add something to our second lesson study cycle?
I think you covered it all, Natalie. I just want to say you are not alone. I too felt like lesson study has made me a better instructor overall. And it was worth it going through those kind of scary moments where it felt impossible to have people in our room and not watching us, but watching the students. It was well worth getting through that. We're ready for the next slide. So, assessment is student learning. We chose this slide because faculty often feel that doing assessment of student learning feels like jumping through hoops. It's not very meaningful. But like the dog, we weren't jumping through hoops when we used lesson study as our assessment project. In fact, we had absolutely no plans of using lesson study data for the assessment project. Toward the end of it, we realized that the lesson study work is exactly what colleges want and also what the accreditation body wants. So meaning you want to think about what students are not doing well, you want to gather data that shows that, you want to make some kind of change, and then you want to gather more data to see if that change made a difference. So we asked the Math Department permission to submit lesson study work for our project to the college, and they agreed. To me, this felt like the first time that we really meaningfully closed that loop, especially that gathering more data to see if it made a change in a meaningful way. And we really hope the college reviewers agreed. When we got the results back, we were thrilled. They said that lesson study could be more broadly implemented as a natural, repeat that, a natural learning assessment project. Years ago, I was the chair for our faculty-led assessment work at PCC, and I also mentored other disciplines for their assessment work. And I saw many great examples of work during that time. But I also saw disciplines who were struggling to find a good approach. And lesson study, in my opinion, is excellent for assessment of student learning. It really makes my assessment heart happy. Natalie, do you have anything to add to this?
I'd just like to add that the review process for our assessment projects at PCC are not done by administration or an assessment office. Like Michelle mentioned, they're done by faculty peers. So when your peers say lesson studies and natural assessment work, or is natural assessment work, it's very impactful. And this work can make a real difference for how students learn. Also, lesson study pushed us as a group to create open-ended complex tasks that are group worthy. And we wanted to see if that kind of rich engagement, which is challenging for students, and it's also challenging to manage as instructors, if that changed how students feel about math. And we found that it did. From the pre and post survey with our students in the lesson study process, we discovered that students felt more comfortable and more capable with math. And this mirrored what we noticed in student work going further in the course.
Thanks, Natalie. So for the next slide, we chose this slide because at the end of our work, we were really, really excited to broaden it. We were excited like these goats. From the very, very start of lesson study work, we wondered what it would look like if we took this to our higher enrollment, but lower success class. And fortunately, at the end of the grant, we did have a dean who supported the work at one of our campuses for one of our pre-100 algebra courses. It was the one that had the highest failure rate. I do want to share that we did make a change to the structure of the work. As mentioned earlier, the teach and reteach part can be really difficult if done in one quarter. It's a very quick turnaround. You're teaching, you're debriefing, you're adjusting, you're getting new materials ready perhaps, and then you're going back in to reteach. Sometimes to make that happen, we had to reorder the course content for our students, and that's really not the best thing that we could do for pre-100 students especially. So when we took this on ourselves, we took the teach and reteach over 2 quarters. So the first quarter, we did the first teach, got everything ready, and then we did, we're planning to do the reteach in the second quarter, where we would also begin a new cycle with a new lesson for the teach. So we started this work in winter 2020 with pretty much a new team. There were 2 of us for the grant project that continued on, but it was mostly a new team. And then global pandemic hit. We weren't able to do the reteach. We thought about trying it, but the whole need to figure out like what Zoom was at that time last year, I really didn't know what Zoom was, and we certainly didn't know how we were going to teach on Zoom. So when I think back broadly about the lesson study experience, 3 things come to mind. The first thing is that the first cycle is probably going to be clunky. It was clunky when we did it with Ed Northwest, and it was also clunky when we took it to the algebra course. There were great discussions in both places, but this it does take time. It's a different kind of faculty collaboration, and you have to kind of adjust to that. It's also, you're figuring out what is lesson study, what's it all about. So if a college takes this on, I really suggest that you commit to at least 2 cycles. The second thing I want to share is about facilitation. So the first 3 cycles with the grant, Ed Northwest facilitated, and the very last cycle of that grant, each college was had to take on the facilitation, had to self-facilitate. I was the facilitator for the last grant cycle, and I was also a co-facilitator for the algebra course. I find it fascinating how groups form and what makes a successful group work together. I take facilitation training every chance I can because I find it so interesting. And at all the trainings I've had, it's always been stated that the best facilitator is someone who is not deeply invested in the work. Because if you're deeply invested, you have opinions and you can too easily kind of push the group to what you think it should be. And that can make an unhappy and frustrating experience for all. So if you're wearing two hats as a facilitator, you need to try to really break apart and make it clear which hat you're wearing, the facilitator hat or the participant hat. So during my facilitation experience, it felt tense to me every single time. Was I keeping that balance well? So my suggestion, if you take this on, try to, if you have the resources anyway, try to find a knowledgeable person about the discipline. It is important the person knows something about the content to be able to ask the group questions and help the group get unstuck if they're in a stuck place. But ideally, I think it's best if that person clearly is in the facilitator role for the group. The final thing I want to mention is about how across the nation, everyone is focused on how to address low student success rates. And it was mentioned during the Jamboard, the challenges, there was initiative fatigue, and there was the challenge of separating content versus practice. So lesson study to me addresses both these things. This is an initiative, if you were to take it on, that feels very meaningful to faculty once you get involved with it. Again, it might take that first cycle to kind of get to that place. But it also is great about separating content versus practice. You're looking at both, and that feels meaningful as you're doing it. So I'd say this is a definite fix to address low student success rates. It's not a quick fix. There is time frequently involved. And I think there needs to be a commitment. So if a college takes this on, I really encourage you to think about what does it mean to support your job secure full-time faculty for this work who might have workload issues, and the job insecure so-called part-time faculty who also probably have workload issues and generally are not well supported. My deepest hope is that PCC will continue this work, supporting this work with time and money. Natalie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to go back to what you were mentioning about it's not a quick fix. Initially, we had thought as a team, we wanted more than 3 new lessons in a year. Initially, we just thought that change wasn't quick enough, but what you learn in one cycle is deeper. And so I just wanted to share 2 big ideas that we learned after the end of those 3 cycles. Not every lesson in a course probably should be a very cognitively high group-worthy task associated with it. So maybe 3 is a manageable amount for a quarter-long course. And the second thing that we learned is, and we've mentioned several times, that the changes to teaching didn't end with the course that we were studying. Every one of us started to reevaluate our own teaching styles and strategies that we, routinely employed. We took what we learned and put that in other classes. Additionally, I just wanted to share that when we collaborated together, 3 of the 4 of us were at one campus, and so we would walk around when we were in the office and had cubicles. We would walk around and talk about things. Sometimes we had little mini planning sessions, and other faculty would often overhear us and got curious as to what we were doing and started asking us questions. Lesson study, like Michelle said, is an investment of time and money, but I think it's a very worthy investment. The work isn't about creating a lesson that is the perfect lesson, the lesson that you would want to pass on to everybody who teaches that course. That's not what this is about. This is about how faculty can collaborate to consider their teaching through the lens of how students learn. It's like I said before, it's one of the best professional developments a college can bring to faculty if they are serious about faculty improving instruction.
Yes, Natalie, I can't agree more about that. I sure hope that lesson study becomes popular among community colleges and at my college for sure, and is a high priority for any teaching and learning centers across the nation. So that is it for us. I'm going to turn it over now to Elizabeth Cox-Brand from Oregon Community College Association. Thanks, Elizabeth, for being here.
You bet, you bet. And thank you to CCRC and for REL Northwest for being such wonderful partners, but especially thank you, Natalie and Michelle and the faculty at Lane Community College and Clackamas Community College for taking part in this study. What could be more exciting than hearing about a holistic approach to improving teaching and learning that's centered on the student experience and how students are learning, except to hear that faculty are saying that it made them better teachers and it made them sharing it enriched the experience of the instructors. It's a win-win for everybody. And we know that many of us across the country are engaged in so many different efforts to improve our student success. But without the focus on student and learning, faculty engagement, and excellent teaching, these, as Nikki had said earlier, there's not going to be deep implementation of student success efforts, and it's ultimately not going to result in the outcomes that our students deserve. So I'm hoping, along with Michelle and Natalie, that this will become something that our colleagues across Oregon in our community colleges will be interested in. I'm planning to follow up with Jacqueline at REL Northwest and Natalie and Michelle, hopefully, to find out what I can do at the Oregon Student Success Center to help spread this out to other colleges across the state, because what could be better than improving the experience for both our students and our faculty, and ultimately that's what we're for. So Jacqueline, I believe you will be opening it up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your comments and your encouragement and support. Thank you, faculty. We'll just keep it here. We are ready for the Q&A portion. Sue,
Great.
are you going to start us off?
I am. So I've
Thank
been
you.
monitoring the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. I have a set of questions, which I'm hoping that Natalie and Michelle and Jacqueline can speak to, but maybe Natalie and Michelle, you can speak to first. The questions are about the mathematics education research and the research literature. So first, did the lesson study team consider mathematics education research as well as research in the learning sciences? I think in the materials, it's framed along learning sciences because the materials are cross-disciplinary, but if you could speak to maybe how you all were able to incorporate the research literature from mathematics education, that'd be helpful. And then a more pragmatic related question about just how do you make space for faculty to look at the research literature? And this is something I know the teams on this project grappled with. So if you all can maybe start off, and then Jacqueline, if you have any thoughts as your role as a facilitator on how do we get the research literature into this process, be really helpful.
Wow, that's a great question. I can throw in some thoughts about it. So I am not trained as an educator. My degree is in mathematics, and I feel like this is a definite weakness for me. So that was another thing that I was really glad to see with the lesson study work, is that the research element was a part of it. Ed Northwest brought great materials to us when we were in the grant, and we've kept all of those. We also have people at our college and some lesson study participants who do have educational backgrounds, and we're able to bring stuff forward. Making the time and space for it at the start, I think is really critical. It might also be important to talk about why we want to do this, why we want to ground it in research, and have people think about the different parts of the research. I love protocols for readings because making sure when you're following a protocol, it can make sure you give everyone a voice. And it also allows for analyzing the paper, what did you like, what didn't you like? There's some great protocols out there for that. I hope I covered that somewhat. Natalie, do you have anything to add to this?
I felt lucky that we had Ed Northwest facilitate and pick some of those initial readings. It was always like a homework to read, but then we were given space and time in our meeting to reprocess and rethink. I'm we even came together, the 3 colleges would have a lesson study convening where we all came together and read more research and talked. And I wouldn't say the research had any particular strategy that we adopted, but we spent a lot of time focusing on mathematics education, including with diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. And what we experienced when we talked about that, always helped inform and keep us student focused. As we developed lessons and tried to make improvements. So I think that having, a facilitator who, to go back to Michelle's comments, a facilitator who has some knowledge that, picking them that could cherry pick, find some good articles that would be helpful related to learning would be a very big plus.
And the only thing I'll add to that is, in addition to a facilitator, it can be helpful to assign a role if there is someone on the team who enjoys going back and finding research and theoretical articles that address some of the key learning issues that are coming up for the group, and possibly even summarizing them for the group or putting them in a format that they're easier to work with together, like a jigsaw. There are some folks who are naturally inclined to do that, and it really helps to empower them. And that's one of the things we talk about with the collaboration norms and roles is there somebody who can do that? So thank you.
There are a few questions about paying faculty for their time. I'll just say that the first 2 years of this project was grant supported, so we had grant funds to help do that. But Natalie and Michelle and Juliet, since this is applicable to your project too, I wonder if you just want to offer any additional insights on the financial support for this, particularly if you don't have a grant the way that we have for the first part of this project.
Yeah, I can go ahead and say some things about that. So we are also being funded through a grant for 4 years. And so we have been providing either some financial support or a course release for faculty who are engaged in lesson study. The other thing that we've been very fortunate to have, also because it's a grant, is graduate research assistants who have been assisting. The first year it was only graduate research assistants from education, but then we also added some from engineering and physics. And that had a huge impact on the way in which the group as a whole operated. What we're doing now in year 3, because the funding will end in year 4, is we've been engaged in intensive conversations with the deans and the associate deans in the colleges about, where are other potential sources of funds to keep the process going and to introduce more folks in, both for faculty themselves, but also for graduate research assistantships. So we have a rather robust student learning center in the College of Engineering with a director who has been sitting in with us on these kinds of meetings to really think about how could we start to make lesson study as a sort of normalized professional development model within the college. So stay tuned as to whether or not that works out. But that is a challenge, because certainly in the first semester and even thereafter, it is a significant amount of time and thoughtful and thinking time, right? That needs to go into the project for it to be successful.
I just want to add to that. I'm part-time faculty, and I'm very lucky that that we got, the grant money at PCC through the CCRC grant. But our dean also funded us above that. The grant wasn't enough money to pay for all of our time, but it was she believed it was a valuable enough experience, to put that extra money in. And The fifth cycle that we engaged in that Michelle led with our Math 95 class, that algebra class, was not grant funded at all. And it does, just like Juliet mentioned, it is very time intensive, and it is active work. You aren't passively engaged in any of that professional development. You are, so it's not something that people would engage in if they weren't supported, just because it is, you can't add it on top of a lot. So of all the other tasks that you have to do. I, felt lucky that I only taught, I'm part-time, so I had extra time. So I tried to, support our team in that, with those added tasks, but it does need to be supported financially.
I think you said everything I wanted to say, Natalie. Yeah, it needs to be thought about. And if you have union contracts, what does it mean with the union contracts? Yeah, and the facilitator role, I think that's a specialized role. That might be something to consider having some money for as well.
We have a question about coming up with a research theme. What advice do you have for other teams about coming up with a powerful research theme? This question was directed at Natalie and Michelle, and I think Jacqueline, you might be able to chime in too if you have thoughts.
So the research theme, I guess we thought about like, what are our deepest goals for students for the course at hand? And that's often not learning an individual concept. It's, for us, it was more about like, how is this going to be in their lives? How are they going to think about mathematics by being in this course? So to me, it was an overview of like what your deepest hopes are for the content that you teach and how that would be in a student's life. That's kind of how I came to it. Natalie, did you have a way that you thought about that during that time?
I remember being in our first cycle, because we kept our research theme through the 4 cycles with our quantitative literacy class. I was very confused in the beginning when we were developing it, because I wanted it to be, I just felt I confused it with like content outcomes with objectives. And so like Michelle was saying, you really have to think about, what do you want your students to ultimately walk out of the classroom with, that's more than that content. And I think once we all had that lens, that we understood that research theme wasn't really content specific, like it wasn't about a lesson or an objective, I don't think that it was hard for us to center on what we ultimately wanted students to experience and know when they left.
It also helped to see examples. I remember that too.
I think that distinction between a content goal and a research theme, it was a really important one. It really helped, similar to the NCTM standards. They're the mathematical practices and then the content standards. I think it opens the door. I noticed that it opened the door for faculty to be thinking ahead while we were focused on a particular lesson and topic. How does that research theme flow through other lessons that I might be teaching and other concepts? So the separation was maybe a little challenging, but an important one. So
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to try to combine 2. We have a question about getting started with lesson study. What are the important prerequisite characteristics of the team? Was there already a norm of instructors observing one another? And is there a need for similar teaching philosophies? And then if you'd like to tack onto that, there's a logistical question, which I think is really important, about aligning schedules, and particularly with part-time and full-time faculty. So if Natalie, Michelle, you'd like to just talk about your team dynamic and maybe also about the scheduling challenges that come with this, that would be a great way to close this out.
As far as our team dynamic, I had mentioned that we were already very much actively working together. But I guess we definitely learned a new way to work together. So as far as prerequisite, and then we even added other team members. I don't feel like there's a lot of prerequisite to building a team, except that you should have people who want to do this. It's not going to be beneficial to the team because it's so intensive, and to have somebody who doesn't want to actively engage. Yeah, so that's my only prerequisite. As far as scheduling goes, we had to take advantage of substitutes for classes so that we could meet or observe each other. And then also to point out, there wasn't really a culture of observations. And the question, I think, was also observations of teachers, of instructors. So I just want to reiterate that, first of all, we didn't have a norm or a culture of observing each other. We did, as a team, there were several of us who would play that observer role to develop as we were kind of learning the course when we first started teaching it. But again, it's not about observing the instructor. This model is about observing the students, about a collective lesson that you created together. So it's a very different feel than just going and watching an instructor. Michelle, did you have anything to?
I think you hit on everything. I just want to reiterate how important it is to have people who do want to do this. This is not an activity that I would suggest that a dean assign to a faculty, where the dean might be having some kind of teaching issues and students are unhappy. This is not the place. You want your early adopters to come in first, I would suggest, and then have that energy spread. And then eventually you get to the tipping point. Some book about tipping points, you'll have the culture shift in the department. So I think that's how it needs to go out. And for money, thinking about the need to maybe have those substitute classes to be a part of the funding. It is hard. It's really hard to find scheduling.
Okay. Well, we're out of time. It was really fun to share this with you, and I thank you all for your time. And we look forward to, we will be sending you out an email that provides links for the resources, and hope that you reach out to us if you have additional questions. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to all the panelists.
Thanks.